that we have as human beings to grow in the natural order upon which Allah has created us. I spoke a little bit in terms of the faculties that Allah has blessed us with and the environment that He has put us in, and that hopefully we will utilize that to look at ourselves and to grow ourselves into the creature that Allah created, and realize and be able to perform the purpose for which He has created us. I'd like to open this morning by reading from Surah 55, Ar-Rahman, and just a couple of ayats as I begin to establish a discussion and a continuation of the line of responsibility that we have as human beings. So if you'd like to join me, if not, I'll just read it briefly here. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Allah most gracious. It is He who has taught the Quran. He has created man, and He has taught him speech and intelligence. The sun and the moon follow courses exactly computed, and the herbs and the trees both alike bow in adoration to Allah. In the firmament has He raised high, and He has set up the balance of justice, in order that you may not transgress due balance. He established weight with justice, and fall not short in the balance. It is He who has spread out the earth for His creatures. Therein is fruit and date palms, producing spats and closing dates. Also corn with its leaves and stalk for fodder, and sweet-smelling plants. Then which of the favors of your Lord will you deny? Alhamdulillah, surely Allah speak the truth. You know, as we continue to read in this particular surah, we are often reminded of which of the favors of Allah do we deny. And Allah continues to point out the great aspects of His creation, as well as the aspects of the creation of the human being and the role and responsibility of the human being himself. One of the things that struck me as I began to think about our talks that we've been having is that of all the things, all the creatures that Allah has created, He has created man with a ability that none of the other creatures have, at least that we know of. That is the ability to speak a language, to talk, to use our faculties in a way that we can communicate in a depth of sophistication that no other creature that we know of today can communicate. Now, we know everything in the creation has its form of communication, but man's form of communication is one of the highest levels of communication known to us today. When the Prophet was requested by Allah to formally establish prayer, there was great discussion on what manner should we use in order to call man to prayer. And all the things that was considered, at the end, it was the voice of man that called man to prayer. Now this is very unique. Why not the cowbell? Why not the bonfire? Now we know there are certain limitations to that, but even the call to prayer, if we just want to talk about physical sound, has a certain limitation to it. At least at that time, we didn't have the sophistication of microphone and mass communication that we experience it today. But of the things, of the options that was available, Allah led man to use the human voice to call man to prayer. Very significant for us to think about in the context of all of creation. We have the ability to communicate. When we think about the ability to speak as we do, through all the senses of man, and as well as all the senses of nature itself. Now, there is communication among monkeys, gorillas, plants, animals, but it has a limit in terms of how much it can communicate outside of itself or outside of its own existence. Man is unique in that not only can he communicate to each other, he can communicate to everything in nature. We read a little bit about that when we look at Solomon, that learned and mastered the language of the bird. We have come to a point that we've almost subdued everything in creation to the work and the support of man's existence. We can communicate with the plant, we can communicate with the animals in a way where we can force them to grow, to prosper, to act and respond in the way that we would like for them to respond for the benefit of mankind. Nothing else in creation can communicate like that to a man except another man. So in the call to prayer, we understand that God has given us the method by which he wants us to interact with each other, and that is to use our voice to improve the conditions of mankind. And once again, I want us to be very practical as we look at the different subjects that we talk about. I try to encourage people not to get real spacey out there and, oh well, this is a mind thing, this is a think thing. Now this is a responsibility. This is analyzing the reality that we exist in, to question it with a great deal of depth, trying to understand the purpose for why Allah created it the way that he created it, not for curiosity, just to be able to go among our friends and our family and act like a big-headed intellectual on religion, but to know ourselves and to understand the purpose for which he had created us. As I begin to talk earlier in this series, I was talking about the oneness of Allah and the oneness of Allah's creation. That when we look into the creation, there is a common factor where everything is basically the same. And because of that common factor, we're able to develop science and draw conclusions with some degree of certainty about how it exists and how it can be manipulated and what is the likely outcome of that interaction with Allah's creation. The Imam in this week's article of the Muslim Journal, a repeat of an address he did down in Ohio, spoke to that very pointedly. One of the things he said was, the common destiny is the destiny that God has created for us in our very human composition. God has composed us naturally, originally, and want goodness, and to want heaven, not hell, to want peace and decency and respect. These are the things that the Imam was showing in his lecture that he was giving at that time, that there is a common purpose for us too, as human beings, and that we have a responsibility to develop that and to adhere to it in order to be the creature in the fullness that Allah wanted us to be. We have, as I pointed out, a very unique census. We have a population of people that we could communicate to, that we could begin to touch them on a level beyond the physical environment that we see, inspire them and bring them into a consciousness and an understanding of themselves, and hopefully join together with us in fulfilling our role in utilizing Allah's creation to mature it and develop it and enable it to grow and produce in the way that Allah wanted it to produce. Now some people might say, well, why didn't Allah just do it himself? My response is, he is doing it. We the human beings, we're that element, we're that instrument in his hand to have the responsibility for developing the world, and more specifically to develop the human being so that the human being can rise to its highest level of functioning within this creation that Allah has placed us in, and cause the creation to respond and act and develop in the way that Allah wanted to develop. This is not a magical process when you look at Allah and how He's managed His creation. Very well orchestrated, very organized. Things are put into place with a balance that never falls apart. Allah pointed that out in the piece that I was reading earlier in terms of how He has spread out the earth for His creatures, and that everything stays in perfect balance. In that same surah that I was reading, everything stays, it says the sun and the moon follow courses exactly computed. So there's no lack of attention to detail on Allah's part. This is not a guesswork game for Allah. Allah had a very definite design to His creation. And we're reminded of that in the Quran, that this is not a haphazard environment that we find ourselves in. Very well planned, very well thought out, very well coordinated among itself. We as creatures, having existed and struggled to come to the level of awareness and understanding that we have today, sometimes lose sight on what it is that we should be focusing on, and how should we be commanding ourselves as human beings. The Imam, in the same article that I was reading in the Muslim Journal, says, and I'm going to quote, "But somehow the environment that we live in these times, is not conducive for us collecting our better senses, coming back to our better minds, as it was for man before industrialization and accumulation of money and things that give us pleasure, cluttered the neighborhood and cluttered the buildings and cluttered it with dead things. It is not like the original environment before man built his world and made his environment and made it so cluttered." So the man was pointing out that the opportunity for us to view nature in its natural sense, in the creation of man, in the creation of Allah's creation in its natural sense, have really been compromised by the way we manage the development of the societies and the community and the life that we live in. With that in mind, it also says to us that we have a responsibility to look at those things that are occurring around us, and not only to engage in the ability to talk, to speak to one another, communicate to each other, but also to clear it up in such a way that the other elements of Allah's creation is able to speak to us in a way and give us some ideas and some thoughts on how we should be managing our life. But we have to get rid of some of the things that have deterred or distracted us from being able to understand Allah's way and to develop the world according to Allah's will. This is the responsibility of man. The tree can't get up and walk. The dog can't get up and talk. Not across nature like we do. Most of those elements in creation talk merely for some day-to-day survival. They communicate from day-to-day survival. Even the ants, when Solomon was on the march, was hollering, "Let us get out the way, otherwise Solomon would step on us." Solomon began to laugh, because Solomon knew that I understand how to manage the life so we can preserve the life of the ant. But the ant don't know how to preserve the life of the human being. So all the ant can do is get out the way and let the human being do his thing. So in that, Allah shows us the great responsibility that we have as people. And I really stress that in these conversations that I've been having here and in other places around the country, that we can't afford to lose sight of the human being and all that we're talking about. We're not a happenstance. We're not just happen to be. It is a very sophisticated element that Allah has placed in His creation with a serious responsibility to enable the creation to grow and to mature to the level that Allah wanted to mature. When we once again talk about the communication of man and we look at the call to prayer, what Allah used to call us to prayer is what we should be using to call the whole of creation to prayer. And that is very sophisticated. I don't think the word sophisticated might not be a good word, but I say very comprehensive, reflective thought to help the communication, help the creation grow in the way that Allah wanted to grow. You know, so many of us, we read our Quran, we study the Imam in his lectures, and we become very expert in some cases on being able to regurgitate what it is that we read and what we heard. And it reminds me of the passage in the Quran saying that they're like donkeys that carry books on their side, but they don't understand nothing about what they're carrying. And so we have a responsibility not only to carry the books, we have a responsibility to understand what the books are saying. We should take some time to reflect as we read. We've all been, to a certain degree, blessed with the capabilities to be able to understand the written language and the communicative language of mankind. Some have become more sophisticated. They understand the workings of nature and other elements in the large creation that they can influence just based on their knowledge of how these different elements communicate with each other. In some kind of way, we can get into the communication stream and manipulate that so that it is of a benefit to mankind. That includes the sun, the moon, the stars, and all those other elements of a large creation that's been created by Allah that support the reality, the oneness of creation itself. But we have a responsibility to understand that, and we have a responsibility to nurture it and make it go forward. And as the Imam has pointed out, what contributes most to our inability to do that is the very things that we've created that blocked us away from the natural relationship that we have to creation. Now, this may sound a little high in the sky type of conversation. Oh, that sounds good, but what are we supposed to do? Well, what we're supposed to do is we're supposed to read our Quran and reflect on it deeply. Not just read the words. Become proficient in being able to regurgitate the language without understanding what it is that we're saying or what it is that we're reading. We have a responsibility to try to develop it so that we can look into it and we bring all of it to one focus, to one organization or one design that best benefit the whole of creation. We have that responsibility. And as I say, the environment, as the Imam said, the environment has blocked us from being able to see that. We see that today. Many very well knowledgeable Muslims, inspired Muslims and whatnot, and people in general, not just Muslims, and we struggle with what is our purpose? What should we be doing? How should we be living the life that we live in? But unless we take the time to read our Quran and to reflect, don't just read it and run through the words, but start thinking, why did Allah say that? Why did He say it like that? We should be asking ourselves that all the time. And not so we can get up and run to our friends and tell them, oh, look at the great insight I got. That's a good part of it too. But it also should call us to action. What are we going to do? And the first action start with ourselves. As I spoke before, I mentioned some of the bad habits that the Muslim got. And also we talked a little bit about, at least I talked a little bit about, the consequences of violating certain aspects of the religion of Islam and how some people call that brutal. But as I pointed out, it's not brutal. When I make up my mind within myself to say this is my position and I will not deter away from that, it is of no problem to me to say if I should deter away from that, you can cut off my hand. Now, Allah set the rules. We cooperate with it. We don't go back and say, that's too harsh, let's change the rules. No, Muslims don't worry about that because they're not going to violate the oath that they gave to Allah as well as to themselves. So don't worry about getting in a situation where that happened. But I think that is a tremendous testimony for us as believers, that we say we believe so strongly in what we believe in, that the consequences that I'm willing to accept if I should violate is as they explained in the Quran. I'm willing to accept those kind of consequences because I believe so strongly that I'm going to follow the way that Allah wants me to go in, that those consequences will never be of any effect to me. And that's the attitude that I take. But you have to think about it as you read things, and don't be so inclined to jump into what is commercially proper, or what is the conversation of the day, and now we begin to look at it from the point of view of what man is enacting upon himself as opposed to what Allah is calling us to in the Quran. Imam goes on to say in this article, and I'm impressed with this article because my thinking was going down this road, and I just happened to open the paper and the Imam was talking about this in this lecture. And the Imam says in this, Allah wanted us to see the beautiful world of living things, trees and animals, and how beautiful fall is with all the beautiful colors. See how God made the green things to grow strong and beautiful. But before they go to sleep for the long period of time, before spring comes again, they give us the beautiful colors of the fall. So the man was pointing out how our sensitivities are stimulated by the things that Allah has placed in His creation. And we should look at that not as just an object that we say is just there, And we never think about, why did Allah put that there? Why is it there like that? And so that it stimulates our thoughts and our ideals so that we too can come to the fullness of the reason or the purpose for which Allah has created us. We, as I point out, need to master the language of the Quran. Not just the Arabic, the language that Allah gave man to communicate to everything in the creation. That's what we need to master. You know, we got some people, and I'm not knocking anybody that can speak Arabic and those kind of things, but we get to a point where we think that that's the end all of our understanding and learning of the Quran. And we fail to go and think deeply about what Allah is saying. So when you begin to talk, there's no substance there. You know, people oftentimes ask me, is it necessary that I learn Arabic in order to be a Muslim? I said no, but it would be good to help you in your understanding, because there are certain nuances in the language that perk your mind as you read it and you think about it. But why would we as Muslims lead people to believe that the only way that they can understand Islam is to learn Arabic? They don't necessarily have to do that. I say to people, Allah created English, Arabic, Spanish, Urdu, whatever you want to call it. All of them are languages of Allah. And it never matters what language you speak in, Allah going to understand you anyway. So we're not going to get caught up on language like that, but we want to get caught up on reflecting on the Quran. Learn the unseen knowledge, the unseen inspiration that God has given us in the Quran, and use it to govern and guide our life. I think then we will be a much more productive community if we use that as a guidance for how we're going to go through this creation or through this life that Allah has placed us in. I want to quote the Imam again on what he was saying in this particular ayah. Some of y'all may have read this, so you know that I'm reading it from the Muslim Journal. And it says, if we could be motivated as the seers and the prophets and the messengers of Allah, motivated by God's handiwork in His universe with all of its possible views, we will have a power to overcome a lot of these weaknesses we have in the trends that we have become set in. We would have the power to overcome them. Allah said in our holy book, "O man, don't think that your creation is bigger creation than the universe. The universe is bigger than us. If we become separated from it or unrelated to it, we become smaller and smaller. If we wake up and begin to appreciate it and say, let me look at God's work and what God did, as you look at it and start appreciating it, it will start increasing your own worth." Alhamdulillah. Surely Allah speaks the truth, and surely Imam Muhammad has analyzed it and articulated for us to follow. So once again, the Imam has always encouraged us to reflect on Allah's creation so that we can learn and so we can come to an understanding about it, and with the whole purpose being to enable us to increase our own worth as a human being. Once again, as I've been stating, and repetitiously so, that we, in my opinion, and I'm sure looking at this article that the Imam has written, his opinion also, we're not realizing our full capacity as a human being. Sometimes we talk about that on a level amongst ourselves. We're not realizing our full capacity in our work, in our intelligence, in our activities. We have a way in which we summarize that kind of behavior. But when we look at ourselves within the context of Allah's creation, we are far behind at this point in realizing our full potential. And the reason so is because many of us, not just the Muslims, I'm talking about human population in general, have not taken the opportunity to come to understand what is their role, what is the reality of their context within the context of Allah's creation itself. And as a result of that, we spend much of our time just the same as a cow or animal, where we go day to day with no other concern about can I eat, can I sleep, can I be able to procreate, and can I be able to have a little bit of fun in this world as I live? Some people say you live and then you die and then there's nothing else. So that mentality has permeated human society with its misguided intent, to the fact that now we become mere consumers and indulging in just the physical interaction that we have with a large creation, and not rising to the full responsibility that we have. We as Muslims, under the leadership of Imam W.D. Muhammad, have been blessed to have a leader that could lead us, a particular people, African American, that could lead us into a knowledge that many would have thought some time ago that we'd never be able to comprehend, thinking that we wouldn't have the ability to look behind the physical context that we exist in and the things that obstruct us, and begin to understand ourselves and our relationship with God in such a way that at this day and time, many of us, I think, do, and many more of us should be, looking at ourselves as a very important facet in the overall leadership of everything within the creation. We should step out our house and we look at the trees, we look at the sun, we look at the moon in our house, we look at our family and all of that. And we should feel good about the context that Allah has created us in. We shouldn't just think that I'm a tool of the industrial society. I need to get up and go to work and do a job so I can put some food on the table and we can eat and sleep. No, we should be thinking on a much higher level than that. We should be thinking about the great things that we've seen come out of the human being that has turned the whole of creation around in terms of how the human being had perceived it. Early on in our talks, I talked about the man that stood on the side of the ocean, and he looked out at the horizon and he said, beyond that horizon there is nothing. If I go to that point, I will fall off the face of the earth and I shall never be able to return. But when he overcame that fear, he looked inside of himself and began to understand himself, and he knew the wonders of Allah's creation. He gathered up the strength to go beyond the horizon, and he found a whole new world. We should do the same thing with the knowledge that the Imam has enabled us to be open up to, and the understanding that Allah has been able to open up to. Let us not be like the one standing on the shore and think that that is the totality of the world. Let us not be standing here today as a creature in a large creation, looking at ourselves and all the great industrial development that mankind has achieved, and think everything that man can do has been done. The Imam said when he came into office many years ago, I'm going into a territory that nobody's ever been in. They've got science on almost every subject that you can think of except the inner workings of the human being. And he said, I'm not talking about a psychology. I'm not talking about how you manipulate his mind. I'm talking about the reality and the context in which which Allah has created the human being, and our role and responsibility within the context of Allah's creation. That is an understanding of man from a point of view that many of the scientists and psychologists have never been able to touch upon. And it is an arena of thought that while we find it in the Quran, now that we got insight, many of us can look in the Quran and we can see that. We can see that we're not just some hands and some feet in a mass of flesh sitting here with nothing going on with inside of us that is consistent with what's going on with human beings throughout the entire planet, in the entire world. And as we study history, we find that some aspects and some people within the creation have been blessed with a higher form of expression, to the point that they have caused profound impact upon the thinking and the ideal and the enthusiasm of the human being to go forward and raise the height of man's participation and interaction with the creation to such a level that when it's written in history and people read it, they think, oh, can we ever be able to do that again? You know, when we look at the great pyramids that they call the 7 wonders of the world, where man has produced different things with his own hand, and in amazement today we question how was he able to do that. But my thing back to us with a reflective thought, do you ever think about the man that was standing there before any brick, any pyramid, any kind of architectural structure was built like that, and that man said, I can do that, I can build that, I can make it rise up, or the man that was able to look up at the sun and look up at the moon and begin to come up with the trigonometry and the other mathematical calculations that enabled us to transverse around the world. What you think would have happened if that man had looked up there and saw around himself all the wonderments of Allah and said, oh, this is great, but I'm so small, there's nothing I can do. See, this is the mindset we have to overcome. We have been called to a destiny that is very unique to us, and it has been given to us through a unique leader that had a very keen eye on what he was doing. Now, there's a school of thought in the community where a lot of people question, well, what was W.D. Muhammad doing? You know, he had a lot of things that started and didn't go anywhere. They seemed to always have problems and couldn't get off the ground. I concluded, after studying and thinking about this for a long period of time, looking at the Imam leadership, and that's something else we should study. We shouldn't get so lost in our pursuit of spiritual knowledge that we forget that Allah gave us a man that did something even in the living presence of many of us today, where we should be studying him in terms of how did he do that and how did he do it in the way that he did it. He had great vision to step out there and begin to talk about calling a human being to a conscious awareness, overcoming their conditions and their circumstances, and motivating themselves with thoughts and ideals that would propel them to greatness. And when the Imam was talking and putting together these projects, he knew either by inspiration or studying how Allah's design is, there was some people among his following that was paying attention to what he was saying. Not all of them was getting it. Some of them was entertained. Imam used to have to stop, and sometimes you get a lecture and say, this ain't entertainment. Get serious and listen to what I'm talking about. This is not for no show. This is real stuff, I'm telling you. He would say that on several occasions. And so those that had been blessed to hear it, they were sitting there and they was thinking about it. And many of those people are still here today. And my message to us, for those that may be among us that's listening today, and for those who walk away from here and suddenly figure that, oh man, that's what I'm being called to. Don't turn your back on it and say, no, that's not for me. That kind of greatness is for somebody else. No, that kind of greatness is for us. And if you can think it, you can achieve it. But if you don't think it, you'll muddle around for the rest of your life trying to find some sense of direction for what Allah has invested within you. So we have a great responsibility, not only because we follow the Quran and Prophet Muhammad, may the peace and blessing of Allah be upon him, but because in our lifetime, in the lifetime of many of us, we have been blessed with a great leader that had a penetrating vision into the soul of the human being in such a way that he gave us individually the tools by which we can begin to grow and cultivate ourselves and look at Allah's creation within the context of the reality that Allah created us in. And also with a sense of responsibility on how we should be interacting and conducting ourselves in the context of Allah's creation. But as the Imam pointed out in the article, the things that they built up in our society, in our environment, when you walk out the door, you find it hard to understand what it is that you're supposed to do. Because man has so blinded each other to the real purpose of our existence that we struggle just to find out what that purpose is. But when we go and step back and look at nature, and we see ourselves as a creature no more important in the whole context of Allah's creation than everything else, because Allah said, think not that the creation of man is greater than the creation of creation itself. So for the big heads that think, oh man is this, no, Allah said, now you keep yourself at a level pace. You know, you're not bigger than the creation of creation itself, but you are part of it. And with that kind of knowledge and understanding, we should be looking at ourselves in this day and time, being those who have the responsibility and the insight and the knowledge that God is talking about of that creature he created within the context of this world. What are you going to do with it? Are we just going to sit up and be bean soup scientists and talk among each other and alhamdulillah each other to death? Or are we going to look at ourselves on an individual and on a collective level and say we have a responsibility to advance the whole of the human world with the knowledge that Allah has given us? We should be about the business of teaching it, because Allah gave us the ability to communicate across several different lines. We can talk to animals, we can talk to birds, we can talk to each other. We can talk inside of the human being in a way, with a language and with words that are so precise that we stimulate and we prick the thinking and the consciousness of a human being in intangible ways that you can't even see. It is the influence on the human psychology that ultimately influence the soul in the direction that the human being go in, that Allah has blessed us with the language to be able to communicate with each other like that, and we should be using it. Not manipulation, not exploitation, because that's what has killed the progress of the human being among each other. Because some human beings learned that there was a language, there was an influence that existed within man, that if you could tap into it, that you can cause them to react in certain kind of ways, and if you kept them ignorant, then they would act in a way that is best beneficial to them. There was a white politician, I can't quote his name right now, many years ago, that made the comment about African American. You know, studying that African American experience is really a lesson in human struggle that can be applied all over the world. But this European, he says that if we can keep the African American, they didn't call them African American, you know, they call them niggers and slaves and all the other kind of stuff. If we could keep them ignorant for just a few more years, we will have destroyed their ability to ever rise up and be a challenge to us. You hear what I'm saying? He didn't say, can we keep them in chains? He said, if we can keep them ignorant for a few more years, they'll never be able to rise up and become a challenge to us. That shows us that even in a sick and psychotic world, they knew the physical flesh wasn't the ultimate end of the life of the human being. There was something much more greater function within the human being we've come to know as the psychology and the soul and the spirit of the human being. But what has been lacking in most cases is the understanding of the keys that open up the wisdom and the knowledge that Allah had given to the human being throughout the very existence of creation itself. This knowledge has been there. I don't want anybody to think, oh, the Imam came up and all of a sudden he got some new knowledge. No, he got the same knowledge that was there when Allah created the first man. But he didn't bless everybody with the keys to be able to open it up, so that not only could he see it for himself, but then he could impart it to other human beings and inspire and stimulate their thinking, and hopefully they will rise up collectively and begin to carry out the role and responsibility that Allah intended for us to do and to have as human beings, a unique creature within the context of His creation. I hope I'm communicating and getting you to understand this. Look inside of yourself to know yourself. We're not just a hunk of flesh and two eyeballs and a pair of ears. Now, those are very important elements for our overall intelligence, to be able to bring information into us and to communicate information back. But the process goes on in our soul and in our understanding of our relationship to God's creation, our relationship to God, and our responsibility to act upon that in a way where we bring benefit to ourselves as well as the whole of creation and other human beings in which we coexist. So I pray that Allah bless us in this brief talk today to come to a focus on our role and responsibility as a unique creature within the structure of Allah's creation. That we have a role and responsibility that's far greater than anything that you look outside of yourself and see, whether it be the sun, the moon, and the stars, and all of that. Allah has given the human being a role far greater than that. And as a result of that, we have been encouraged and we have been exposed to the responsibility that He's calling us to, is to manage what we see in the whole of creation. We're doing it now. We're no longer that person standing on the shore and say, if I go beyond the horizon, I'll fall off. No, we done went past the horizon. And we done proved that every time you go to one horizon, you cross over that, there's a whole world out there, a whole new world out there that we never could imagine. As I speak this morning, I think about us under the leadership of Imam W.D. Muhammad, Muslims around the world and people in general. We're at that point now. We done stood on the side of the water and we have tried to estimate what's on the other side. And many of us today have taken the inspiration to go beyond the shores as we see them. And I'm encouraging you today, let yourself be part of that thinking, part of that human exercise, to take yourself beyond the shores, beyond the limitations that you currently see, and know that Allah has blessed you with a great responsibility within the context of His creation, and that we should be about the business of trying to exploit that in a way that enables us to fulfill the purpose for which Allah has created us for. Now, I know that sounds like an ambiguous term to say the purpose, as if there's guesswork in it. There's no guesswork in it. Allah says in the Quran, I created you by an exact design. I gave you the Quran, I taught you the Quran so you can understand it. He said, I created the man, I taught him speech, and I gave him intelligence. The sun and the moon follow courses exactly computed. When we started off with this series of conversation, I said there's a oneness in all of creation. And that oneness enables us to understand everything else in creation, because that oneness is consistent through all of creation. So Allah said the sun and the moon follow courses exactly computed. There's no mistaking that design. Once you see it, it will be consistent throughout everything else that you see in Allah's creation. So I would want to encourage us once again to read our Quran. And let us sit and reflect deeply. Don't spend a whole lot of time sitting around reflecting, because at some point you got to get up and go to work. Let us reflect deeply on what Allah is saying and speaking to us through those words that He's given us in the Quran. And let us call ourselves to a command of action. That we start off with what Allah has given us, and that is to teach. We have the ability to teach and to educate the population. But first we got to teach ourselves so we have something to teach. And then we should take this insight into the human being out, populate it, not for greedy, selfish purposes. As I've said in an earlier discussion, if you go into the world and develop something solely to enrich yourself, you won't be very successful at that. But if we go into the world, regardless of the prosperity that we realize as a result of our work, with the intent to enable the whole of the world, the whole of the community we may be immediately exposed to, then we will find much more success in that kind of pursuit than we would for individual pursuit and self-satisfaction. So we have a responsibility as Muslims, learning Muslims, to try to thrust ourselves into the role of human leadership. We don't want to take over no government. We don't want to go in and become part of the political apparatus. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about going to these community meetings, sitting down and singing Kumbaya and I want to be nice to you. No, I'm not talking about that. But what I'm talking about is that we rise up and we begin to be a part of the human movement to bring on the next cycle that human beings will express themselves, that we be a part of that we've been blessed with a knowledge and an insight, and we've been given the Quran, that almost everybody on this line can pick that Quran up and read it and gain some insight from it. But overcome the fear of the shore. Don't think you're in a place that if you go further that you're going to fall off the other side. No, you're not going to fall off the other side. Explore your knowledge, explore your experiences. Begin to love and interact with each other so we got comrades. You know, we don't have no comrades. Most of us got a suspicion of each other today. And once again, it's because of the environment that we created around ourselves. But we got to come back to loving each other and loving what Allah has created. And we can trust each other and we can work with each other so that the knowledge that I've gained, I'll be able to share with you and you share with me. And I said, not just for the purpose of me influencing you, but let's us sit down as scientists and say, this is what I've learned. Well, what did you learn? Well, I learned this. And so we began to put it together and come to one common reality and one common purpose. With that, I'd like to thank our audience for providing me, and Imam Rasul providing me with the opportunity to be on this conference call and share some of the words and thoughts that Allah has blessed me and inspired me to come into. And I would hope and pray that Allah would bless you to walk away from this, not thinking about Noah said this and Noah said that, but what has stimulated your mind? What was the message that Allah had for you? That's the reflective thought I would hope you would say. I'd have been on this conference call for 45 minutes or however long it's been. Oh Allah, what did you have for me? What should I be learning? What should I be doing? And when Allah give you that inspiration and that insight, stand up and go to work. Don't be afraid. Don't say the world is against me. I'll never be able to do that. No, you stand up and you go to work. And you begin to work in the place you find yourself. And you work in a way that you try to benefit the whole of the community. And you will find that you will be very successful in your estimation of success, if not the world's. So I thank you, and I pray that Allah bless us as a community of Muslims to continue to go forward. As always, I would like to invite those on the line. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to make them at this time. And then we will leave it up to the discretion of Imam Rasul as to how long that will be and how it will be coordinated. So at this point, I thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Imam, we thank you for your presentation. Another Grand Slam. We want to open it up for questioning, but we want to stop on the hour. At 6 a.m. we want to stop on the hour. Brother Muhammad will end it for you. Again, Imam, thank you, Imam. Allah save the best.
Alhamdulillah.
For questions or comments.
And listen to my brother speak. Allah has blessed me to be able to work with the human being, to be able to see the potential in the human being, also the interest in the human being, and to be able to help them with the potential of their skills and development. That's all I got. I'm finished there.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you, brother. Anyone else? Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.
Wa alaikum assalam.
I'm Noah, brother here with Aziz. This has really been a blessing, because I think that I read that article. As a matter of fact, I was there when Imam did that article in Columbus. But the thing is that you connected it. It really opened up a lot more avenues in my mind, especially when we spoke about the universe, how we disconnect ourselves from the universe, and we become small when we become individual. And it also helped me to see and understand how important it is for us to really, really stay connected as a community. And I think it's beautiful, because when you mentioned a part of the human family, the human movement, to me it really did a lot of good for me, because that the things that we do in the community in reference to community concerns, things that I noticed that you also do in the community, which I think is very important. But most of all, like I said, thank you for such a beautiful connection, and I pray that Allah continue to bless us and bless this community to continue to get the insight and the knowledge that you bring us.
Assalamu alaikum.
You have a few minutes left.
Facilitate. I got to get off.
We still have a few minutes left. Is there any other questions or comments?
Catherine, and I want to thank you, Imam Noah, for bringing us what you brought us this morning to remind us of our potentials that we have within ourselves, and I hope we can bring that together and grow in the spirit and into Islam and be the greatest Muslims there is, because we are given so much good knowledge that we don't have no excuse to say that we can't do this and we can't do that. Allah has blessed us. We have blessed people, and I thank you and I thank Allah for you and for all the people that's on the line that's trying to grow and to come into the knowledge of Islam, to be a better Muslim and to love each other and to respect each other. Assalamu alaikum.
Alhamdulillah.
Assalamu alaikum, it's Brother Anthony. This is another example of Allah's greatness that Imam Noah spoke about, is that we limit ourselves. Just think of this conference call and how when we was coming together, we traveled distances, and how the economy changed, and a lot of folks were not able to make the trip. here we are using one of his inspiration to give someone to use a new beginning here of the conference call to keep the word going and hear these messages. You go back in time and man said, well, we're going to run out of oil. We're going to use well oil for lights and stuff. And the creation was already there, and we had starting petroleum. And it's just endless. Now we're able to use the energy from the sun to continue life and continue inspiration here. The biggest thing is the inspiration Allah gives each and every one of us there, but to act on. Some act on it, and most don't. So it's just really inspirational that we hear it, we remind it, and it's such a not to limit ourselves and act on what Allah gives us.
Yeah, I just want to comment as a reminder. We all got it. It don't matter what shape or form you're in, we all got it. We human beings. The oneness of Allah is the same. If one human being can think it and conceive it and do it, every one of us can do it. The same thing that made the man get up and develop the telephone, and ultimately the communication, as the brother pointed out, ultimately to be able to extract energy from the sun. That man to sit down there and looked at that sun and say, there's a way we can get something out of that sun. That's the same kind of inspiration we should be living with today, because we've seen it and Allah showed us who was responsible for giving that knowledge to His people.
Thanks, man.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Is it you? Anyone else? You still have a few minutes left. We got about 5 or 6 minutes left on this conference call. This is Nasir Muhammad. If no one else has any comments, I want to read something from Imam Muhammad's Islam Primary for Future Success. And this is on page 95. He says that, and I quote, we have been taught that Allah created everything. He created it perfectly to serve our best conditions and opportunities. We call it paradise. He says the real danger is misconception. We misconceive purposes. Therein lies the danger. And he gives an example. There's a pig, an animal that Allah says that we are not to eat. And therefore we cannot raise pigs for somebody else to eat. But Allah created that animal, and if you leave it out of you for the purpose, it is a good pig. It's only a bad pig when you start eating it or selling it to someone for food consumption. Once in our community history, we made the pig more important to our health than Allah. Then there was a lot of formulation of Islam followers who had forgotten about what Allah had taught us about the pig. But if the pig came up in the conversation, they were prepared to the self-with. Now, man, I would give such input. How in the world can anyone eat pork? How in the world could the brothers eat pork knowing all these trichinosis and reserves that are in the feed? Who can do without that? But I don't think that I can ever eat that filthy pig. But when someone calls me and says, how in the world can anybody eat the pig and believe this that take us to believing in Allah. Imam Seifullah, I want to thank you for your presentation. And it was good. I was very enlightened by your presentation, which you brought to us this morning.
Alhamdulillah.
As Imam was Imam said that Allah created everything for a purpose. And we have within our own self, inculcated within us the ability, as you say, to achieve. And hopefully, inshallah, we will achieve this. I would say that by this time next year, we should have some farmland to begin our industry. You know, industry begins in the ground, off the ground, raising things, growing things. And inshallah, this time next year, hopefully, we will have the land and a farm and growing other businesses. And out of this, we can have our schools, we can have a hospital, we can have our office for our own lawyers, doctors, and inshallah, we'll keep on growing. We have a vision that Imam wasn't even told us about. He said, here's a vision that can't see it. Can't see the vision. We don't want to misappropriate anything or have any misconceptions about anything about our life. Our life is to serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in serving Allah, we know that Allah is our Rabb, and we are His servants. We know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He has no children, that He has no parents, that He is the Creator, and we are His creation. And we have been taught well. And so there's no excuse for us not to have the things that we need in order for us to foster and for us to grow. So we want to thank you, and we want to thank all those who are online today just listening.
Alhamdulillah.
Because we know that those who are really listening, as we now say, those who are really listening are those are the ones that will grow. Some people they didn't listen. That's a fact. You know what I said that and when you speak to an audience of people, everybody don't hear the same thing. There are some people who listen. I speak to you. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Imam, excuse me, out of your whole speech, what stuck in my mind was the idea that, excuse me, that you mentioned that if you can think it, you can achieve it.
Right.
That is a profound statement. If we would come up with these ideas, like you said, think about it, and cultivate that idea like a farmer cultivates his garden. Just really give some thought to what you just said about if you can think it, you can achieve it. That is a true statement. That is a profound statement for people to leave here this morning with that thought in their mind. Assalamu alaikum.
We've got the hour now. It's 6 o'clock, and we need to begin to close out. We got having one more statement, about another minute left, and we're going to close out. If not, I'll go in and close now. We're going to close with the Father House, but before this, I want to ask Brother Muhammad, the Wichita Chancellor, to make the dua. Is Brother Muhammad still on?
Oh Allah, bless the students of Imam Wafdi Muhammad, guide the hearts, the mind, the consciousness, the human intellect, the peoples of the world back to the proper worship of you.
آمين. نبي يدعو في الوفين الله يا فاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. آمين. تكبير.
الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر.
السلام عليكم.